Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the next episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we bring you interesting guests. And today we do a second take, which is really rare, but sometimes it happens. And I'm so glad that Adam was willing to indulge me, because I think it was mainly my fault that we didn't make it on the first try. So Adam Goldman, welcome to the Ideal Investor Show.
Thank you so much, Axel. So great to be here again.
Thank you. Like you said, it's kind of deja vu in a way, but the recording works okay today. Before we get into, like franchising and stuff like that, tell the audience a little bit the origin story. How did Adam get to where he is right now and what he's doing right now?
So look, I lived in Eastern Europe. I graduated from college in 1996 and was in Poland and Hungary for 7 years with a 2-year break to go to business school, and went back to the United States. I wasn't sure what to do next, right? And so I started a real estate investment company. That went really well. But what I found in 2008 is that things were kind of drying up after the Great Recession in 08 and 09. I own a portfolio of owner-financed single-family houses in Houston. And I just wasn't sure what to do next. And so my friend said, hey, you should look at franchising. And when I first thought about franchising, my thought it was McDonald's and it might be some sort of owner-operator food, and went to a coach and she gave me 3 really good options and decided to open an office cleaning master franchise in 2010. That went really well. Fast forward 8.5 years, I received an unsolicited offer that was attractive for my business. And I decided to become a coaching consultant where I'm helping people that are looking potentially to invest in franchises. I'm a matchmaker, connector between them and franchises that are pre-screened in 75 different industries.
Very cool. And so if somebody were to say, okay, I'm interested to go from, let's say, like a W-2 or some sort of like regular employment and become my own boss, I would suspect, but maybe you want to elaborate a little bit, that franchising is kind of like a good transition, a good idea to do. And if so, why?
So look, what I would say is this, that if you look at Gerber's E-Myth, what he says is that there are different types of entrepreneurs, and the vast majority of entrepreneurs that are trying to start businesses from scratch, they're doing too many different things, right? Franchises are very attractive because of their systems that they might have. And so people that decide to invest in them are, the typical person is someone that's in corporate America that is looking for an exit plan from corporate America. And maybe it's a situation where maybe the spouse starts doing it full time at the beginning, or they have a managerial role, and then maybe they're actually managing managers. It's very attractive in that there are different management structures or ownership structures with different time commitments inside the world of franchising.
Okay, very cool. And so I know that you mentioned briefly today and in our last conversation that you had this cleaning business, I think in Houston. Did you previously have had other franchises too, or is that the main one that you were operating?
That is the only one that I've ever owned.
Okay. So when you say you're coaching people who are interested to get into franchising, besides the particular topic, I mean, maybe we should touch really quick on that, how important it is that somebody has kind of like previous knowledge about any of the ideas that either you might present to them or they come to you and say, hey, like one of my clients recently said, yeah, somebody offered me this really interesting dumpster business where, you're basically placing dumpsters where people need them for any kind of renovation projects or like if the city needs to clean something up and so forth, and they don't have enough of their own. And I literally said, I have not ever heard you speaking about dumpsters or anything like that. How did you come up with that? So how would you do that or react to that if somebody came to you and say, hey, Adam, I saw this dumpster business. It's the good thing that I should do.
So great question, Axel. So what I would say is this: franchising is one of the best places in the world to kind of make a career, or to make a career change. And the reason why is franchise brands are specifically looking for people that don't have any background in the industry. They're looking for people that have business savvy, but it's actually a positive if you don't have a dumpster business already, because they want to like treat you, they want to teach you how to do it their way, which is a powerful thing to do inside of an industry. What I would say is that also, I mean, again, you need to have business acumen in general. The other thing about my industry, which you mentioned, a lot of times people come to me and they see things that are hot. It might be a crumble cookie or some sort of hot fad. Maybe it's frozen yogurt. They get all excited about it. And I tell my candidates to kind of beware of what's a fad, what will happen in 5 or 10 years. And a lot of times the things that aren't very glamorous are ones that have staying power, frankly.
You're saying like Warren has a point when he says buy Coke and like Santa Fe Railway and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yes. If he doesn't understand the business, he doesn't buy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess that's a little tricky lately with all the high-tech stuff basically running away, and you wonder, like how much do you leave on the table? You said something I believe is pretty profound from franchising, but I believe it applies in other places, in other professions, and other areas of life as well. And that is the ability to fully commit and adopt a system. Can you give a little bit of an idea how much of decision freedom somebody who wants to get into franchising is still there, and how much are you basically, and I'm overstating it by claiming it's like a slave to the system that you're basically being put into?
So look, there are two types of entrepreneurs, Axel. There maybe there are more, but the ones that I know of, right, are the people that are good at starting businesses from scratch. And I think it's a second type of entrepreneur, someone that is good at following systems and processes and maybe tweaking them a little bit, right? So that's the kind of person that's good for franchises. If you're the kind of person that doesn't see any benefit in hearing about a system, then you probably shouldn't be a franchisee, right? You can't buy a McDonald's and change the golden arches into something else and decide to sell gyros there instead of hamburgers, right? So, I mean, what I would also say is that there's a misconception in franchising. I have two schools. The first one is people think that the franchise brand is going to do everything for them, and they're not going to do anything at all, and they're going to pay this money, and then all of a sudden they're going to get a check in their mailbox every month. The second misconception is people that think that the franchise brand is going to do nothing at all, meaning that they're not going to do anything. They might not even have a system or playbook. It's just kind of like they'll take their money, they'll take the royalty fees. They got to figure everything out on their own. Now, I think that the reality is somewhere in between, where these franchise brands are going to create systems that you kind of follow for success, like a playbook, but they're certainly not going to be running the business for you.
Absolutely. I think that's a very profound point. The other aspect I think that I was kind of hinting in, I believe there is a certain component of scalability here. For small business owners, besides their passion, when they get to a certain size of business, they discover that to scale further, they need to actually establish systems. Besides agreeing or disagreeing, would you say in our day and age that there are certain franchise opportunities that people should favor or should look into versus others?
So look, it's hard to just kind of look through a magazine and say this specific one has an amazing system, right? And everyone talks about how amazing their system is, but you kind of need to go through validation with existing franchisees and see how good the system is or not. I mean, I've heard of some systems where with blue chip franchises where the ratio of people that are there to support franchisees to franchisees is very favorable. Maybe even like a ratio of maybe 3 or 4 franchisees per franchise consultant, which is amazing. And what I do tell my candidates is that one of the ways to kind of put the odds in your favor is become the best friend of the support staff at the franchise brand, because there's limited resources no matter where you go.
Absolutely. So let's touch a little bit on one of the things I've seen or heard quite a concern about: saturation, right? I mean, if we take the fast food industry, so to speak, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I think they have reached a certain level of saturation, maybe even certain places oversaturation. So if somebody looks, and it doesn't have to be fast food, it could be dumpsters, it could be cleaning in Houston, it could be anything. How do you, when you actually work with people or coach people, how do you address the point of how much of this is already here and how much more can the market actually support?
So Axel, what I would talk to you about is I'm not afraid of competition. You're talking to a guy that was in a very, very competitive industry, meaning office cleaning. I'm looking at unique selling points, right? What kind of angle does the business have, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. When I go to get my oil changed at my car, I will never go to Jiffy Lube again. And the reason why is I don't want to leave my car, right? I thought it was brilliant that Take Five took this idea, which is kind of easy, and saying, look, you don't need to leave your car. You can hang out in your car, be on your cell phone, and I'll pay more money for that. That's kind of like their unique selling point. People tell me they're worried about competition. I get saturation for certain businesses, but I'm even more scared about a business that hasn't been proven or there's no one in it at all. Give me a business that exists, that has competitors, and give me a brand that has some sort of unique selling point, and I'll take that all day long over something that's a brand new business, that's in an unproven business that has no competitors whatsoever.
Okay, and got that point. How about saturation within a franchise? Like if you take Jiffy Lube, how many Jiffy Lubes on one street is reasonable? And is there any kind of saturation point where you would say, as a coach, I'm not sure if you would want to really try that?
So the vast majority of franchise brands, maybe 95% or 90, are ones where you buy a territory, meaning a specific geographical area or zip code or county, where no one else is allowed to actually do service within that geography, and that protects you against oversaturation.
Cool. And so that means if somebody starts somewhere in a geography and they want to keep growing, having more locations, they would have to buy additional territories. Is that kind of
That's correct? That's how you expand typically.
How long would you say somebody should consider from the moment? And maybe you can also address how much it even costs, because I always hear these like, yeah, McDonald's costs $1 million to have a store or whatever, a restaurant, whatever it's called. For regular people, I don't know why I'm hung up on my dumpster business today, but something that is maybe not a McDonald's. What do people have to consider to invest in, and how long does it really get to the point that you can say, okay, here's kind of like a reasonable income expectation that you can generate if you do it right?
So I get asked all the time, how much money am I going to make, Adam? That's like the number one question. Let's talk a little bit about how expensive franchises are in general.
Okay.
So let's divide them into storefront and to non-storefront. So if you have a storefront, we're talking about something like you might have a McDonald's or anything that's a brick and mortar retail location. Those start on the high end, they're about $1 million plus or more. But on the low end, if you have something that's a small footprint, maybe like a boutique fitness studio, that might be $200,000 all in, right? When it comes to non-brick and mortar businesses, and I'm not saying it's glamorous, Axel, but if you're in Houston, Texas, let's talk about mosquito spraying, right? That might start about $125,000 all in and go up from there. So that's kind of the range. Now, the question that I get asked all the time is, how much money will I make by when? And the answer is, unfortunately, I don't know, right? I don't know how good you are. What I can tell you is things take time. One of the things that I like about non-brick and mortar businesses is you're able to have a quick start, meaning you can go up and running and you can maybe even start your business within 30 to 90 days. Whereas when you have a brick and mortar location, you're waiting 6, 9, 12 months to actually even sign a lease and to be open. And that means it takes more time to ramp up.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, in this kind of mosquito spraying scenario, is the majority of the money for the system or for the equipment, or a little bit of both?
I would say the majority of the money that you're spending, you have to pay money for a system no matter what, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the reason why it's relatively inexpensive is that the equipment's really low, right? It's the spray is pennies on the dollar for what you might be getting for people for providing that service.
Okay. So it's the majority is basically getting a part of the organization has developed. Now, on the brick and mortar, this gets a little closer to what my normal stuff is about. Do people actually own the real estate, or is it always leased?
It goes all different types, right? So I have candidates that have decided to invest in the real estate underneath. Yeah. I have others that are going ahead and leasing property. It all depends. Some brands are more conducive than others to actually buying the real estate underneath.
Yeah, I've actually heard, and I don't know, you have to tell me, you're the expert, but I heard that McDonald's is actually a real estate operation with an attached restaurant.
That is absolutely true. And the person that is owning the real estate, I believe, is the head office. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's what I mean, because they started at like 1950 or something like that. So they got the initial real estate when they were really scaling and more corporate than franchise. I think it's now the other way around, but there was a time when they had more locations owned by the company than as franchise model. I'm kind of wondering for the audience that is listening, okay, franchise is a way to go into that of the quadrant model where you are basically self-employed or you're basically the decision maker. Are there any that you currently advising on that are somewhat related to real estate?
Sure. I can't go into specific brands today, but what I can tell you is that I have plenty of brands that are real estate related. It might be a situation where you own the real estate underneath. It actually might be a real estate service business, right? That's very popular, either property management or things behind where your clients are realtors. That's a popular segment as well. I also have things where it's kind of like arbitrage opportunities where you're leasing space for a certain amount from a landlord and you're going ahead and subleasing it for a significant profit. I'm all over the place with real estate, but real estate certainly is a component of some of my investments that I connect my candidates with.
Okay, cool. And so is a broker franchise model too, or is that something different?
What do you mean by a broker?
Or if you say, okay, well, I'm like with Coldwell Banker or Century 21 or any of those organizations, they're all over the country, right? And they have offices all over the place. And typically, I know exactly the model because I'm not an agent or anything, but I know most of them, somebody starts out as an agent and then they become a broker so they can have other agents underneath. And I've always been wondering if these larger kind of, I would say, chain or operations, which have systems, and they have all their branding and everything, if those are actually franchises or if they're just companies that give their name and their systems without really following the traditional franchise system.
I don't know much about the real estate brokerage business. My understanding is it's a really tough time to be in that industry because of all these recent regulations about disclosures and everything else right now. It's really making a huge impact on the industry in the past couple of weeks.
Right. And that was, I'm a sneaky guy in that way. I asked the question because I'm pretty sure they're not. There's some kind of other model on how this works in real estate brokerage and stuff. But what I do see is that with the recent lawsuits and recent changes in regulations, there's a huge push for organizations and people to develop new systems that can make the whole process easier. That's why I asked, how much you do there. If you already see things where people say, okay, you don't have to pay the traditional 5%, regardless whether the house is $1 million or the house is 100,000, which I always felt was like unfair. Or
Yep.
you don't have to come and visit in person. And I know there have been systems like, you can do video or these 360 camera and things and stuff. And so I'm wondering, are we working our way from a real estate perspective, regardless whether you're an investor or you're looking for real estate as an occupant owner, to see services potentially with franchise models that say, okay, we can offer you a kind of like an all-around service using these modern tools that doesn't cost you like $20,000 or $30,000 on $1 million home.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the real estate business, it's very popular in the franchising world around the service, right? Meaning,
Yeah.
I used a franchise brand when I was selling my parents' house in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they did everything for me. I was in Houston trying to sell the house in Cincinnati, and I was able to take care of the junk removal, the landscaping, and it was a really good service to have, kind of like an all-in-one.
Cool. And the last thing I wanted to get in, because you're coaching people, could somebody come to you and say, okay, I have an idea, but I don't want to just do it by myself, and I don't want to necessarily go and find venture capital or stuff like that. Can you help me to turn it from the get-go into a franchise model where we develop systems and we immediately or relatively immediately want to allow other people to come in and start building it together and expanding it that way?
I get asked this question a lot too. How can I franchise my business? It's really hard to get into the industry as a franchisor. There are a lot of competitors. It's expensive from a regulatory perspective. And also, once you have a great franchise, to actually find people that are interested in purchasing it is also a challenge. It's very hard to find franchise candidates. But what I would say is that if anyone's interested in franchising their business, I don't do that myself, but I know of some great companies that can help with that process.
Cool. So I think we touched on all the different aspects. So if somebody says, hey, this whole topic of franchising is really interesting, and Adam sounds like a great guy, very knowledgeable and everything, can you describe a little bit how somebody who shows interest maybe go to your website and then starts working with you? How would that actually look like?
If anyone's interested in franchising, I promise to tell you if I don't think you're a fit. Best way to schedule some free time on my calendar is on franchiseadam.com or franchisecoach.net. And then what will happen is after we'll schedule this time, after we speak for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, if we think we're a good fit for each other, what will happen is I'll ask you to fill out a survey. And then after you fill out that survey, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to get to know you and anyone else involved in this decision together. Then after we meet, I'm going to go ahead and I'll narrow it down to the top 3 brands based on a model that we'll create together where I'm figuring out characteristics of an ideal franchise, things such as how many employees you want, how involved in the business do you want to be. My goal is to give you 3 things that are different than one another to kind of compare and contrast. And then what will happen after that is that we'll go through this process together, and most people are ready to say yes or no within 2 or 3 months to the brands that I give them.
Okay, very cool. And a little bit, are you actually also facilitating in some way if people, let's say there is something between $100,000 and $200,000, do they have to come up with that money all by themselves, or can you facilitate some financing, or how does that look like?
So I do connect people with my financing partners that I work with. I can help them with that. There are many different sources. Things are such as a 401k rollover or sometimes in-house financing. There's just different options that people can go through, or even portfolio loans.
Right. So I'm only asking because the prices that you mentioned, some people might listen and say, yeah, that sounds interesting. But if I have to come up with $150,000, I couldn't do it or stuff like that. Financing would be probably one of the important options to make a decision ultimately, right?
Absolutely. So I'd say that maybe 20 to 30% of my candidates use some sort of financing to actually make this thing work. Sometimes they use friends or family money in order to make it work as well. When you buy a house, you typically get a mortgage that might be 80% of the value of the house. The same thing can hold true in franchising. It's available. Now, as you know, interest rates are a lot higher than they were a few years ago, right? So that's part of the equation that people ask. But a lot of times they're able to find relatively inexpensive interest rates that could help them to make a decision.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, the whole purpose of having a franchise or running a franchise is to ultimately make money, right? Like, so you're not planning to have to be cash flow negative, if that's even a really applicable term, for years and years and years. It's maybe for an initial period of time, but that's at least what I would assume is probably the main intention. Who runs a business that makes no money?
Absolutely. Trying to make money as quickly as possible with margins that will make you blush.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, that's good because after you pay that initial loan back, then you come to me and get some real estate investing, right?
There you go.
Okay, cool. Any other things that we should touch on?
So Axel, I think that the one thing that we didn't talk very much about is there's a misconception in franchising that you kind of need to be an owner operator. And we touched a little bit on this, but I have plenty of things that are not totally absentee, like a real estate investment, but I have things that we call them semi-absentee in my industry, where you can use it with managers. Maybe your spouse is helping, but you can really run a business in 10 or 20 hours a week, right? If it's the right business and you have the right acumen and you have the right managers running the business.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I like to point to, even though it's definitely not a franchise thing, is I'm a big fanboy of Elon Musk. A lot of people ask the question, how is it the heck possible that the guy is basically running 6 or 7 companies, depending on how you count? And my answer is always, well, it starts out with really learning and having a talent in hiring the right people. And for me, yes, you might want to go through training, you might want to understand exactly how the business operates, but sooner or later, if you have that talent or you develop that talent to have the right people running, basically like in Elon's companies, the executive team, right? There are strategic decisions to be made. And as I'm assuming a franchise owner or any other business owner, I constantly have to do this too, especially in the franchise model, somebody to say, okay, I'm no longer helping to clean the toilets in my restaurant or stuff like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. If you have the right team, it's amazing. So look, I have some brands whose business model is you have great managers and they become buyers of your business. You finance You actually seller finance to them, your
Yeah,
business,
exactly.
which I think is fascinating.
Well, I meant this mainly in your point that you said we hadn't touched on is how directly involved or how semi-passive can you get, right? And I think
Yep,
in any business that has a little bit to do with how much can you trust your management team or your leadership team or whatever you want to call that.
absolutely. And
So,
some models don't have any employees at all.
yeah, that's true too. So,
Got it.
yeah, well, that's that's with AI. This will be probably even more in the future, right? Like where more and more of those things can be automated. Adam, so you mentioned it already, but I want to ask you one more time. What is the best way for people to reach out to you?
So if look, let's talk for a quick time, and if I'm a good fit, great. And if I don't think we are, I'll let you know as well. It's a free service, franchiseadam.com or franchisecoach.net.
Okay, cool. So, after we talked about pretty much everything that we can in half an hour, I always ask one or two questions at the end. Which, if you had a time machine, where would you go and why?
I think that it would be really interesting to see what life was like during the American Revolution. You kind of hear about like what it was like and all these things. We talk about the Declaration of Independence and everything else. And it'd be fascinating to actually live that, the whole versus the British and meeting all these people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson to kind of see all the differences that we would have.
Okay. And you do this while visiting from your ranch somewhere in Kansas or something, right?
Like something like that.
You don't want to be too close.
That's right.
Okay, cool. Well, Adam, it was wonderful. And I think today we actually made it all the way to the end and the recordings kept going. So I want to especially thank you for coming on a second time and talk about this for a second time with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Axel. A pleasure.